course, that we do the truth lesson first, but if you'd rather do the meditation, that's fine. We'll just switch them. You want to do the meditation first?
I'll do it last.
Okay. All right. You want to do the truth lesson?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, good morning. We're planning the program as we go along. I want to begin with the experience of sharing my gratitude with you all. My gratitude, first and foremost, to Mary Beth for reaching out to me and for the invitation, for the Unity Board of Directors, for their generosity and their hospitality, and for all of those that I've met and all of those that you were part of our experience yesterday that have really helped me feel a part of this ministry. And I so look forward to being with you for the next few weeks and getting to know you, getting to learn about your great city. And so this will be a wonderful experience for both of us, I hope. And thank you once again, and we'll be seeing you around. The talk title that I gave to Mary Beth is based on a magazine article I wrote some years back for Unity magazine. And I thought it might be a great way to begin, a great overview of how I see Unity and how many of us see the Unity movement, both in terms of its past and in terms of its future. So the title, again, is Where East Meets West. And, of course, that flies in the face of Rudyard Kipling's affirmation. Do you remember what that is? Oh, east is east, west is west, never the twain shall meet. Well, of course, we know he was wrong there. But interestingly enough, those words were written in the same year that the Unity movement began. And in that same year, the East and the West were beginning to meet. Not so much population-wise or geographic-wise, but spiritually they were beginning to meet. In 1889, Charles Fillmore published the first issue of Modern Thought magazine, which is considered the beginning of the Unity movement. So the Unity movement began with publication, with education, and with prayer. It sold for 10 cents, had 16 pages, and in those early days it was very eclectic. It had articles from a variety of authors, Christian Science authors, Theosophy, Buddhism, Hinduism. It was very eclectic and very explorational. Eventually, the articles begin to focus on the theme of what Fillmore's called a practical Christianity, which was basically a Christianity that included the universality of all teachings, including the Eastern teachings as well. The foundation principle was and is this, that everything in the visible world is a manifestation of one underlying reality. Everything that we see, everything that we experience is a manifestation of one reality, which of course we call God. Or if you don't want to use the word God, it doesn't make a bit of difference. It's still the same reality, you see. It's the essential nature. It's the reality of everything that is. And central to this teaching is the inherent unity of all life, thus the name Unity, so that we are diverse and yet we are one at the same time. And somebody, I don't remember who it was, it was Peter Russell, I think, gave the example. He says if you take a big lump of clay and it's all like a potter's clay, and you make several different items out of it, cups, plates, all sorts of bowls, pots, containers, each one looks different And if you don't know any better, you would say they've got nothing in common. Yet they're all molded from the same substance, you say. And so even though the form looks the same, if we were to demolish the form, it would return to exactly what it is in the case of every one of them, you see. So we are all part of the one, and at the same time, we are all formed, shaped separately. So in unity, we celebrate both the diversity and the unity. Unity doesn't mean we try to mush everybody together into one great big ball of something. And on the other hand, it doesn't mean that we focus totally on diversity and separation. There's no contradiction between those two. Different in expression, united in essential nature. The teachings of Jesus Christ began to be the primary source for this new philosophy, which is interesting enough because this very fact, this is rather ironic, the very fact that unity began to focus on the teachings of Jesus Christ separated them from other Christians. Okay? Because as you know, most Christianity focuses on Jesus as the Messiah, primarily taught through and interpreted by the Apostle Paul. The focus is not so much on the teachings as on Jesus as an icon. In unity, we see Jesus as the teacher. We see Jesus as the way shower. But we don't see Jesus as some icon that's essentially any different than we are. Different in expression, a masterpiece sculpture, but the same essence as you and I. So a new form of Christianity was emerging, and it is still alive and thriving to this day. That was 130 years ago it began, so it's still breathing and still doing well. Changing in many forms and many expressions like all things are today, particularly in the area of spirituality and religion. The unity movement and its teachings can be seen as part of a larger movement in human consciousness known as the perennial philosophy. The perennial philosophy. How many have heard that term before, the perennial philosophy? Okay. A perennial plant is one that comes up year after year after year. Now, in the wintertime, it may look like it's dead, but it comes up again in the spring. You don't have to keep resowing the seeds. It's inherent. Dormant, but inherent. And so the perennial philosophy speaks to that underlying philosophy, both East and West, that since time immemorial, that wisdom teaching, that lineage of wisdom teachings that's been handed down to us in a variety of ways is, you might say, streaming through the consciousness of humanity. But most of the time it's beneath the surface. Most of the time it's like that perennial in the wintertime. We don't see it. You know, if you live in Kansas City, it's buried beneath ice and snow much of the year. But even if you don't, I imagine it doesn't appear to be growing. It doesn't appear to be alive and awake. So the perennial philosophy was much the same way, and it would emerge in different ways in different eras. In the Middle Ages, it maybe looked like alchemy, or some of the strange tarot readings, and some of the what today we would call rather occultish. But it was occultish, and the word occult, by the way, means hidden. It was occult, it was hidden, because at those times it was rather dangerous to openly believe and teach what we're believing, you see. So you and I would both be probably committing our suicide to stand up publicly and profess what we believe today if we were to do that 500 years ago, or even fewer. So the perennial philosophy comes and goes, and it's emerging now. Of course, it's emerged in the 60s. It's emerged through Christian Science. It's emerged through unity. It's emerged through Eastern religions, through theosophy. And of course, in the 19th century, in the form of transcendentalism. That was the big shot here in our country, in the North America, 150 years ago, just prior to the Fillmore's time, and contemporary with the Fillmore's was Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau, and that whole strain of thought that was emerging in the form of transcendentalism. And again, the basic philosophy is we are all one in essence, different in expression, and that this underlying reality is eternal, it's universal, and it's accessible to every one of us. In fact, it's not only accessible, it is the very purpose of our existence, is to discover and to consciously express it. That's the purpose of our existence through the eyes of the perennial philosophy. So let's take a look at the difference between Eastern and Western spirituality and how these come together in the perennial philosophy, and specifically today, how they come together in the unity movement. So I think one of the best ways to characterize the key difference between Eastern spirituality and Western spirituality is where they look, where they turn to find that which is sacred. So that's one of the key characteristics, if you're studying a religion, is to ask the question, where do they turn to find the sacred? Well, in the West, where have we turned to find the sacred? Right? Straight up. God is up there. Spirit is up there. Moses went to the mountaintop, and the Lord descended from the heavens, and so forth. And Islam and Christianity and all the Western religions see God as up there and out there. Out there, separate from me. God is other than me. That's real clear, is it not? In Christianity and in Judaism. In fact, in Judaism, you're not even allowed to utter the name of the Lord. It's so sacred. So God is so out there. So not me. And the same way with Islam. The Allah is much, much more than we are. Is so great. In Western religions, God is up there, out there, and also they put a lot of emphasis in the West on corporate worship. We come together as a church, we come together as a mosque, we come together as a synagogue, we come together and worship as a community. We don't see that so much in the East. We take it for granted that all religion comes in the form of churches or some congregation. That's not necessarily so. And likewise, in the West, we put a great deal of emphasis on belief. So, when we ask somebody about a religion that we aren't familiar with, what's the first question we typically ask? What do you believe? So in the East, that would be a strange question. They might say, what's that got to do with it? Religion is not necessarily about beliefs, or even in the Native American traditions. You ask a Native American what they believe, it's like, believe. It's how do you live your life? Who are you? Those are really the questions, you say. So, beliefs, rituals, we can call them sacraments, or various kinds of rituals, various kinds of historical events. The West puts a lot of emphasis on history. In fact, it could be said that the Western religion, the Western religious tradition began with the Israelites, and they, in a sense, invented history. Because prior to that time, history didn't exist. Because time was seen to simply move in a cycle. Those that lived in the agrarian and in the hunter-gatherer cultures, one year was pretty much like the next. What did matter was when the sun rose and set, when the temperature changed, when the animals migrated, when the plants grew and when they died. All of that was of utmost importance. But that happened over and over and over and over and over again. So time just goes around in a circle. That was perfectly logical to them and to this day. However, with history comes unrepeatable events, and time begins to be seen as flowing in a linear way. So the covenant at Sinai was not an annual event. It's a one-time only event, you see. The resurrection of Jesus is not an annual event. That's a one-time only event. The angel visiting Muhammad, that was a one-time event. That was not an annual event, you see. So these events are celebrated in a historical context. So human relationships, history, corporate worship, God in the upper and outer is pretty much the hallmark of Western religion. And the East, of course, goes in the other direction in almost every way. In the East, to find the sacred, one goes down and in. In fact, you turn away from the world. Maybe not permanently. You know, if you're a monk or a nun, it is permanent. But even for a layperson, a householder, the turning within is in the form of a meditation or a retreat. You sort of close out the world, close down the senses. God is not found up there, but deep down in here. So one goes down deeper. One goes further inward. The outer world is seen as being perhaps less important. It's more of a byproduct. It's not of primary importance. You know, in Christianity, Jesus is worshipped. Now, in Buddhism, as it evolved into a religion, the Buddha became worshipped just like Jesus did. But in the early teachings of Buddhism, they used to say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, what should you do? Kill him. Kill the Buddha. And what that meant was you are the Buddha. There's no Buddha outside of yourself, which is very different than, you know, if you meet Jesus on the road, kill him. That's blasphemy, see? But in Buddhism, you meet the Buddha on the road, you kill him, which you don't mean that physically, literally, of course. What it means is you destroy any external icon, and you find the truth totally within yourself. Quite a contrast there, huh? So how do you bring those two together? Well, I think you know the answer to the question. You come to a unity church. The unity teachings, as well as the perennial philosophy, and I want to say the unity teachings are unique in its immediate expression, but the underlying wisdom tradition of unity is timeless. The divine is not a separate and not a distant being. It's the essential nature of all that is. It is closer than our own breath. So, as we hear that, does that sound more like an Eastern thought or a Western thought? Much more like an Eastern thought, right? Some years back, I used to teach world religions in the ministerial program. And whenever I talk about Hinduism or Buddhism, Taoism, Eastern religions, the students would all go, wow, that's unity. Whenever I talk about Christianity, they'd say, oh my God, we don't believe that. Which is so interesting because the core teachings of unity are more resonant, it would seem, with an Eastern teaching. And yet, unity turns to not the Buddha, but to Jesus for its primary teacher. It doesn't turn to the Buddhist sutras or the Upanishads as its primary textbook. It turns to the Bible. It doesn't use Sanskrit. It uses English and it uses Christian terminology for the most part. We have a worship service. This looks like a church from the outside. Don't tell anybody what it is. But we are a church, and yet it's not a church in another sense, you see. That's one of the great paradoxes within unity. The Fillmores came to believe that one did not have to abandon Christianity in order to find universal truths. And really, that's really the cornerstone of what unity is about. Their mission was to breathe new life into the traditional language of Christianity. They believed that the teachings of Jesus contained the wisdom of the ages, including the wisdom of the Eastern traditions, as well as the West. In traditional Christianity, salvation, which literally means wholeness, doesn't mean going to heaven. The word itself, salve, means healing, wholeness. So to find salvation is to find wholeness, to find completeness. So to find completeness, wholeness, in Western Christian traditions, we must follow a creed, we must adhere to a creed, we must perhaps go to certain sacraments. I grew up Catholic, you have to go to the sacraments, the church, Mass, and all that sort of stuff. And you have to believe certain things. What was going on inside of you, they could care less. But in terms of adherence to the belief and what you do is what's of primarily importance. In unity, our prayer practice, our belief system is more of turning within to find the truth. Prayer is essentially the same as meditation in unity. When we use the term prayer in unity, we're not talking about praying to a far distant God. We're talking about awakening the divinity within our own being, you see. Which again is much more Eastern. So, unity reflects the Western view of human relationships, being in the world, being a change agent in the world, and being an instrument for bringing the kingdom of heaven on earth, so to speak. Only the kingdom of heaven on earth doesn't come down by Jesus descending in a cloud. It comes through each of us, awakening our own Christ being, and then living our life in a very clear and passionate and conscious way. So, East meets West at the heart of unity, and I would like to leave you with this thought that the unity teachings present a very powerful synthesis of the best of Eastern and Western thought, and that it is truly a religion for our age, and honored to have been a part of the unity movement, or be part of the unity movement for, I have to stop and calculate it now, about 45 years. And so I welcome and express gratitude and congratulate those of you that share this path with me, and I appreciate that so much.